My name is Naomi Reyes. I'm 33 years old. 9 years ago, my parents stood in my doorway and told me that if I married Eli Reyes, I would no longer be their daughter. 9 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, their car pulled into my driveway after a 6-hour drive from Briar Hollow, Kentucky, and my mother got out holding a folded sheet of paper with 5 bullet points written in blue ink. The total at the bottom of that page was $612,000. She did not say she missed me. She did not ask about her grandchildren. She said, "We need to talk about what's fair." But she didn't know that for 9 years I had been keeping a file of my own. Before I tell you what was in it, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you'd think. And drop where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one of those comments. Now let me take you back to the spring I turned 24. The year I found out exactly how conditional my parents' love really was. I grew up in Briar Hollow, Kentucky, a town of about 3,000 people where everyone went to the same 3 churches and gossip traveled faster than the morning mail. My father, Walter Pierce, owned the only insurance agency in town, the kind of business where everybody's policy ran through him whether they liked him or not. My mother, Carol, ran the Women's Auxiliary at First Baptist and decided, without anyone ever electing her, who organized the potlucks and who didn't get asked twice. My younger sister Brianna was 3 years behind me and built differently, louder, prettier in the way that gets noticed at football games, the kind of girl who never had to ask twice for anything. I was the older one, the serious one. I made good grades, kept my room clean, and never gave anyone a reason to worry about me, which in my family meant I was also the one nobody worried about. Love in that house was distributed like a budget, and Brianna's line item always got funded first. I went to the University of Kentucky on a partial scholarship, the first Pierce to leave Briar Hollow for anything other than a wedding or a funeral. I studied business, then went on to law school 3 years later, because I liked the idea of a profession where the rules were written down and everyone had to follow them. My parents were proud of that part. They liked telling people their daughter was going to be a lawyer. It fit the story they wanted to tell about themselves. I met Eli Reyes the summer after my 2nd year of law school. I was working a clerkship downtown, and my car broke down outside a shop on 5th Street with a hand-painted sign that said Reyes Auto. Eli came out wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had clearly given up trying to be clean, looked under my hood for about 90 seconds, and told me my alternator was dying, and he could have it fixed by 5. He did it for $60 less than the dealership quoted me the week before, and he didn't try to upsell me on a single thing I didn't need. I went back 2 days later to thank him properly, and ended up sitting on a folding chair in his shop for 2 hours while he worked, talking about everything and nothing. Eli was 31 then, 4 years older than me, and he had a 6-year-old son named Mateo from a marriage that had ended 2 years earlier. His ex-wife had moved to Phoenix for a job and Eli had custody, which meant most nights he closed the shop, picked Mateo up from his grandmother's, made dinner, and fell asleep on the couch with a wrench catalogue open on his chest. He hadn't gone to college. He joined the army at 18, done 2 tours, come home, and used his GI benefits to get certified as a mechanic instead of going to school like everyone expected. None of that mattered to me. What mattered was the way he listened, like whatever I was saying was the most important thing he'd heard all week, and the way Mateo would run across the shop floor in oversized boots just to show his dad a rock he'd found, and the way Eli would stop everything, customers waiting, phone ringing, to look at that rock like it was a diamond. Eli didn't talk much about the army at first. It came out in pieces, a scar above his eyebrow from a training accident he laughed off too quickly, the way he automatically scanned a parking lot before walking through it, the specific kind of quiet that settled over him on the 4th of July when the fireworks started a little too close to the house. He'd done 2 deployments before he turned 23, came home, and instead of going to college on the benefits he'd earned, he used them to get certified as a diesel mechanic because, in his words, somebody's got to keep the trucks running so the rest of the country gets its groceries. He married young, had Mateo at 26, and 2 years later his wife told him she'd taken a job in Phoenix and didn't see a version of her life that included staying. He didn't speak badly about her, not once in all the years I knew him. She wasn't wrong to want something different, he told me once. She just didn't want it with us in it. He raised Matteo mostly alone after that, closing the shop at 6, picking his son up from his mother's, cooking dinner most nights from a single battered cookbook with half the pages stained orange from spaghetti sauce. My parents met Eli exactly twice before the wedding, and both times told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. The first time I brought him to Sunday dinner at my parents' house, and my mother spent the entire meal asking him questions clearly designed to locate exactly where he ranked on some invisible ladder she carried around in her head. Where had he gone to school? What did his father do? Did he own the shop or rent the space? What church did his family attend? When he mentioned, gently and without any defensiveness, that he'd served in the army instead of going straight to college, she said, "Oh, that's nice," in the exact tone she used when someone brought a store-bought pie to a potluck instead of baking one. My father shook his hand, said almost nothing the entire evening, and disappeared into the den to watch television before dessert was even served. The second time, a few weeks later, my mother called him Michael by mistake. His name is Eli, and didn't correct herself or apologize, just kept talking like nothing had happened. I told myself both times that it was nerves, small-town unfamiliarity, that they just needed more time to come around. My sister was the only one honest enough to say the truth out loud. At Thanksgiving that year, Brianna leaned over while we did dishes and said quietly, "He's nice, but Mom is never going to be okay with this, you know that, right?" I didn't know that yet. Not really, not until the letter came. Eli proposed on a Tuesday, no ring yet, just a question over dinner at his kitchen table while Matteo slept down the hall. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "I know I'm not what your family pictured, I just need to know if I'm what you pictured." I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called my mother that night. I want you to understand I called her first before I told a single friend, because some part of me still believed that telling her would make it real in the right way, that she would hear the joy in my voice and match it. Instead, there was a long pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped, and then she said, "Naomi, he has a child. From another marriage. You understand what that means for your future, don't you? Not congratulations." Not tell me about him. A warning, delivered in the same flat tone she used to announce who wasn't bringing enough deviled eggs to the church picnic. My father got on the extension a minute later. He didn't say much, which was typical of him, but what he did say I have never forgotten. "You're a lawyer, Naomi, you could have anybody. Why would you pick a mechanic who already failed at marriage once?" I told him Eli hadn't failed at anything. His marriage ended. That isn't the same as failing. My father didn't respond to that, he just said, "Think about what this does to this family," and hung up. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Cream-coloured stationery, my mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to sign my permission slips. 4 paragraphs. I read the last one so many times I can still recite it. "If you marry this man, you are choosing him over everything we built for you. We will not attend. We will not pretend to support this. And if you walk down that aisle, do not expect us to be waiting at the other end of it now or ever." I folded that letter and put it in a manila folder in my desk drawer. I didn't know yet why I was keeping it. Some instinct in me, the same instinct that made me double-check every contract before I signed it, told me to hold on to it anyway. We got married on a Saturday morning at the county courthouse with 11 guests, all on Eli's side. His mother, Rosa, flew in from El Paso with a garment bag and a casserole dish she refused to let go of during the entire flight. She pinned a small silk flower to the collar of my dress, held both of my hands, and said, "Welcome to the family, Mija. We've been waiting for you." No one from the pier side came. There was no aisle, just a hallway with bad fluorescent lighting and a judge who mispronounced both our last names. Afterward, we had lunch at a taco truck 2 blocks away, 6 tables pushed together, Matteo standing on his chair to give a toast that mostly involved him listing his favorite kinds of tacos. My dress cost $90 from a consignment shop. I have never once regretted that day, but I remember sitting in our apartment that night, looking at a bouquet of grocery store carnations, and crying, not because I doubted my choice, but because I had just done the most important thing of my life, and the people who raised me hadn't bothered to show up and watch. 1 week after the wedding, I mailed my parents a card with our wedding photo inside. Eli and me on the courthouse steps, grinning, his hand on my waist. I wrote, "We're happy, I hope you can be happy for us someday." 11 days later it came back, stamped in red, returned to sender. I sat with that envelope for a long time before I opened the manila folder, slid the card inside and wrote on a sticky note in red pen, Item 1. Wedding photo returned. That was the beginning of what would eventually fill 3 binders. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I think a lot of you have lived some version of this. Has anyone in your life ever made you choose between them and someone you loved, and made that choice sound like it was the reasonable one? Drop a comment and tell me. I read every single one, and I think more people carry this than ever talk about it. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started. Year 1 was the hardest, the way year 1 always is. I called my mother 4 times that first year. Voicemail every time. I left short, careful messages, the kind where you choose every word because you suspect it might be the last one anyone actually listens to. "Hi Mom, just wanted to say hello. Eli got a new contract with a regional trucking company, the shop's doing well. I hope you and Dad are doing okay, call me whenever you're ready." She never called back. I sent a card for her birthday, a card for my father's birthday, a card for Christmas. All 3 came back with the same red stamp, like clockwork, like someone had a system. My father sent exactly 1 text message that year, 3 words, "Give it time." That was it, no follow-up. I read those 3 words probably 200 times trying to find some warmth hiding in them. I never found any. My sister Brianna posted a family photo on Facebook that spring. My parents, her boyfriend at the time, all smiling around the dinner table at the house I grew up in. The caption read, "Sunday dinner with my people." I had never been invited to a single Sunday dinner since the wedding. I wasn't in the photo, obviously, but I also wasn't mentioned, not even as an absence. It was as if I had simply been edited out of the family's history, the way you'd crop an X out of an old picture. I didn't comment. I screenshotted it though and printed it and added it to the folder. I told myself it wasn't about revenge. I was an attorney by training. I document things, that's what I do. I just hadn't expected to be documenting my own life like a case file. Eli quit a steady mechanic job that year to build something of his own. He'd noticed that every small trucking company he worked on came in with the same problem. They were running their maintenance schedules on paper logs and gut instinct, and it was costing them thousands in breakdowns that could have been caught early. He started building software on nights and weekends at our kitchen table, a simple fleet maintenance tracker that could flag a part before it failed instead of after. He called it Fleetwise. I built the pricing model and reviewed every contract he signed, because that's what I knew how to do, and he built the engine, because that's what he knew how to do. Neither of us slept much that year. Matteo did his homework at the same table while we worked, occasionally announcing unprompted facts about dinosaurs. Year 2, I started keeping the folder properly. No longer just loose papers shoved in a drawer. I bought an actual binder, navy blue, 3 rings with tab dividers for each year, and I started numbering every item and writing the date in red pen because numbers don't lie, and neither would I. Item 4, voicemail to my mother, January, 41 seconds, no return call. Item 5, Father's Day card, returned May. I didn't do this with any plan in mind. I told myself I was simply doing what lawyers do, keeping records, because if you don't write it down, eventually someone will tell you it never happened. That same year, Matteo started calling me Mom without anyone teaching him to. I remember the first time. We were at the kitchen table and he looked up from his chicken nuggets and said, "Mom, can I have ketchup?" Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I corrected him gently, "Honey, I'm not your mom," and he just shrugged and said, "I know, you're my other mom," and went back to eating like he'd settled something important. Eli looked at me across the table, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. Year 3, our daughter Sophia was born on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 pounds 2 ounces, with a head of dark hair that made the delivery nurse laugh out loud. Eli cried holding her, which I had never once seen him do, not even at his own father's funeral. Rosa flew in from El Paso the next day and stayed 2 weeks. She cooked, she cleaned, she rocked Sophia at 3 in the morning so I could sleep, and she brought a hand-crocheted blanket she'd started the week we told her we were expecting. That was what a grandmother looked like. I sent my mother the ultrasound photos 5 months earlier, returned. I sent the birth announcement, returned. I sent a photo of Sophia gripping Eli's finger in the hospital, returned. 3 more items for the binder, numbers 9 through 11, and I started to notice that I had stopped feeling the sting each time. The grief was still there, but it had gone quiet, the way an old injury stops hurting in the moment and just aches when the weather changes. That was also the year I heard, second-hand from my Aunt Denise, my mother's younger sister, the one person in that family who had never fully signed onto the silent treatment, that Brianna had told a mutual friend, Naomi's kids don't even have real grandparents, that's what she chose. Denise sent me the screenshot without comment. I sat with my newborn daughter asleep in my arms and read that sentence 11 times. My children had a grandmother. Her name was Rosa Reyes, and she flew in from El Paso every 6 weeks and never once missed a birthday in her life. I printed the screenshot. Item 12, red pen, dated. Year 4, the binder had grown thick enough that I had to start a second one. 3 rings worn smooth at the hinge from being opened and closed so many times. Fleetwise had 11 employees by then and had moved out of our garage into an actual office above a hardware store downtown. Some weeks I'd come home from depositions and contract reviews and sit at the kitchen island helping Eli proofread vendor agreements until midnight, the 2 of us trading a single pen back and forth across a stack of paper, Mateo's homework folder still open on the other end of the table where he'd left it hours earlier. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters. I didn't keep that binder out of spite, and I didn't sit and flip through it some nights fantasizing about revenge. Most weeks I genuinely forgot it existed. It lived in the bottom drawer of my home office, behind tax files and old case notes, gathering dust like any other archive. But every time something arrived, a returned card, a forwarded screenshot, a voicemail I saved because deleting it felt like erasing evidence of my own life, I filed it. Same process every time. Print it, label it, date it, red pen, tab. Eli asked me once why I kept all of it. I told him the truth, because someday when our kids are old enough to ask why they don't have grandparents on my side, I want them to have facts instead of my version or anyone else's version. He nodded. He understood that better than most people would, because engineers keep build logs too, and for the same reason, not to relive the failures, but to know exactly what happened when something needs explaining later. Fleetwise had 11 employees by then, and had moved out of our garage into an actual office above a hardware store downtown. Eli still worked 60-hour weeks. I had stepped back from the firm to part-time so I could handle Fleetwise's contracts and run our household, which is a polite way of saying I did the work of 2.5 jobs, and pretended it was manageable. We ate dinner together every night at 6:30, no exceptions, because that was the one rule we never broke no matter how chaotic everything else got. The silence from Briar Hollow had become a fact of life by then, like the weather. Some days I noticed it, most days I didn't. Year 5, Mateo started middle school and Sophia started walking, and Fleetwise signed its first contract with a regional carrier running over 200 trucks. Year 5, Mateo started middle school and Sophia started walking, and Fleetwise signed its first contract with a regional carrier running over 200 trucks. That was also the year Mateo came home from school upset in a way he rarely let show. A classmate had asked him at lunch why he never talked about his real grandparents, and when he said he didn't really have any on his stepmom's side, the kid told him that probably meant they didn't like him. He didn't cry telling me about it, which somehow made it worse. He just sat at the kitchen island turning a pencil over in his hands and asked, "Is it because of me? Because I'm not actually your kid?" I knelt down in front of him and told him the truth as plainly as I could, that it had nothing to do with him, that it had nothing to do with anything he could have controlled. That some adults make choices about who they let into their lives, and those choices say everything about them and nothing about the people they leave out. He nodded like he believed me mostly and went back to his homework, but I sat in the binder room that night and added a note that wasn't really an item, just a sentence in the margin. This is the actual cost of it, not the returned cards, this. It wasn't flashy growth. It was the kind that pays salaries and keeps the lights on without making any headlines. We bought our first real house that year, a modest 3-bedroom outside the city with a yard big enough for the kids and a kitchen island where Mateo did homework while I reviewed Eli's vendor agreements on the other end. Nobody gave us that house. We built every inch of the down payment ourselves, dollar by dollar, and signing those mortgage papers felt like the first real proof that walking away from my family hadn't broken anything that couldn't be rebuilt. On a Tuesday in October that same year, I made the mistake of checking Facebook, which I rarely did anymore. My mother had posted a photo from what looked like a family dinner, new dining set, Brianna and her now husband, a baby in a high chair I didn't recognize, my nephew, I had never met him. The caption read, "My whole world." 3 people in that photo and a baby and a table that did not include me, my husband, or either of my children. I closed the app and went to bed. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying about Carol Pierce somewhere around year 3. Some wounds don't heal so much as they go numb, and you learn to live around the numbness the way you'd live around a bad knee. Year 6, Brianna got married. I found out from Instagram 4 days after the fact, in a tagged photo from someone I went to high school with, captioned "Best Wedding of the Summer." 200 guests, a live band, my parents in the second row looking exactly the way I remembered them, just a little older. They hadn't invited me. They hadn't told me. I stared at that photo for a long time, not out of jealousy. I'd had my wedding, 11 guests and $90 dress, and the best man I have ever known. But because they all looked happy, and they looked happy without me, like my absence wasn't even a gap anymore, just the shape the family had settled into. I did something that week I probably shouldn't have. I ordered a set of linen napkins monogrammed with Brianna's new initials, wrote a card that said, "Congratulations on your wedding. I wish you and your husband every happiness, love, Naomi," and mailed it. It came back 3 weeks later unopened, the tape on the box still sealed. Item 19. I put the binder back in the drawer, sat at my kitchen island, and listened to Sophia singing something tuneless in the bathtub while Eli argued good-naturedly with Mateo about whether sharks could survive in a swimming pool. That noise right there in the next room was my family. They were enough. They had always been enough. I just hadn't fully let myself believe it until that exact moment. Year 7 changed everything, though none of us knew it yet. Fleetwise closed a Series B round, $8 million from a logistics-focused venture fund out of Atlanta. I remember the call. Eli was in the kitchen flipping pancakes for the kids when his phone rang, and I watched his face shift from polite professional calm into something I'd never seen on him before, pure disbelief. He hung up, turned to me and said, "They said yes." I did the math before the pancakes were even done. $8 million in funding put Fleetwise's valuation north of $40 million. We still held a healthy chunk of the company. We weren't rich yet, not in any way that changes your life overnight, but the numbers were finally heading somewhere I'd only ever modeled on spreadsheets for other people's businesses. I left the firm entirely that year and joined Fleetwise as general counsel and head of operations. For the first time, my name went on the company paperwork right alongside his. A regional business journal ran a small feature on Fleetwise that full 2 paragraphs, mostly about the funding round and the founder's unconventional background. Army veteran, single father, self-taught engineer. Nothing major. The kind of coverage industry people notice and everyone else scrolls past. Except someone in Briar Hollow did not scroll past it. 3 weeks after it ran, my Aunt Denise texted me. "Heads up, your mom asked Pastor Green's wife about something called a Series B at the church potluck. She didn't know what it meant, wanted you to know." My mother had not spoken my name aloud in 7 years, according to everyone who would have told me, and now she wanted to know what a Series B was. The math was changing. And Carol Pierce, who had built her entire identity on knowing exactly where everyone in town stood, was paying attention again. That same year I sent what I expected would be my last birthday card to my mother. 7 straight years, 7 returns, but that year I tucked something extra inside, a photo of Matteo and Sophia at their school's fall festival, matching flannel shirts, Matteo missing his 2 front teeth, Sophia laughing so hard her eyes had disappeared into her cheeks. On the back I wrote, "They ask about you sometimes. I tell them you live far away." I mailed it expecting the usual red stamp back in 11 days. It came back in 9, but something was different. The envelope had been opened. The flap was creased, resealed with a thin strip of clear tape. I held it up to the light. The card and the photo were both inside, untouched in terms of content, but someone had taken them out, looked at them and carefully put them back before sending the whole thing back to me anyway. Item 23. Birthday card opened and resealed. Photo viewed. Still returned. I wrote that label with a steadier hand than I expected, because I'd suspected for a while that my father was never the true architect of this silence. He was the enforcer. My mother drew the lines. He just made sure nobody crossed them. Year 8, Fleetwise grew faster than either of us had projected. 80 employees, offices in 2 states, a partnership with one of the largest fleet logistics providers in the Southeast. A trade publication put Eli on the cover of their year-end issue under the headline, "The Mechanic Who Out-Engineered the Engineers." Small print run, industry-only distribution, but it existed, and apparently word travels even through industries nobody in Briar Hollow had ever heard of. I started noticing strange activity on my old law school alumni profile that month, a handful of views from an account with no name visible, location listed simply as Kentucky. I didn't think much of it at first. Then a logistics podcast had Eli on for 45 minutes, almost entirely technical fleet telemetry, predictive maintenance algorithms, nothing close to viral. 3 days after it aired, Denise texted again. "Your mom told Linda at the salon she always knew Eli was smart." Direct quote. First time she said his name out loud in years. Always knew he was smart. 8 years of silence and now she always knew. I didn't add that to the binder. It wasn't a document, it was hearsay. But I wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside cover, because I wanted to remember the exact moment. My mother started quietly rewriting 9 years of history into a story where she'd been proud of him all along. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever had someone disappear from your life and only resurface once the numbers changed, go ahead and drop a comment below and tell me about it. I think more of us carry this than we ever admit out loud. And while you're here, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time, because what happens next is the part that changed everything. Year 9 started with a family group chat. My Aunt Denise was accidentally added to it by Brianna, who apparently meant to add someone else with a similar saved contact name. Denise stayed in that chat undetected for 3 days before anyone noticed and removed her, and in those 3 days she took screenshots of everything. Because Denise has never once in her life missed an opportunity to be useful in exactly the right moment, she sent me 7 screenshots. I read them sitting in the parking lot outside Sophia's dance recital. Brianna, his company is supposedly worth like 40 million now, maybe more after this acquisition thing. I've been tracking it online. My mother, how do we even approach this? She won't talk to me. My father, the rare voice of hesitation. I don't know if this feels right. My mother again. Walter, she has more money than this entire town put together now. She can afford to help her own family. Brianna, make a list, Mom, be specific. She's an attorney, she responds to specifics. Start with the mortgage, then medical, then a little extra for goodwill. Make it look like an investment in the family, not a request. My father did not reply after that. I sat in that parking lot with the engine off, watching through the windshield as parents filed into the recital hall with bouquets and balloons, and my hands were shaking, though not from sadness. 9 years of returned cards, a cream-coloured letter that told me not to expect them waiting at the end of any aisle, ignored grandchildren, and now that the numbers had changed, they wanted to approach with a plan. I drove home that night, printed the screenshots and added them to the binder. Item 26. Family group chat, financial reconnaissance confirmed. I told Eli everything that evening after the kids were asleep. He read the screenshots slowly, the same deliberate way he reads code when he's hunting for a bug, and when he finished he set my phone down on the counter and just looked at the wall for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "Nothing yet," I said, "but I want to be ready." He nodded, because that's who Eli is. He never tells me what to feel, he just stands next to me while I figure it out. I should explain Aunt Denise here, because she matters more to this story than almost anyone else outside my own house. Denise was my mother's younger sister by 6 years, the family's permanent outlier, divorced once, remarried happily the second time, the only person at any holiday gathering who ever said the thing everyone else was thinking and pretending not to. She'd liked Eli from the first afternoon she met him, mostly because he fixed her truck for free the same week my parents sent back our wedding photo, and she never once let my mother forget that detail. Denise wasn't a spy exactly. She just refused to pretend things weren't happening, which in a family built almost entirely on pretending, made her the closest thing I had to a reliable witness. The next morning I called a colleague from my old firm, a family law and estate attorney named Patricia Voss, not to file anything, but to understand exactly where we stood. Her office was 2 floors above the one I used to work in, same view of the same parking garage, and she still kept a candy dish of butterscotch on her desk that I remembered from my first year out of law school. She walked me through it in 20 minutes flat. My parents had no legal claim to anything, not to Fleetwise, not to our house, not to a single account. 9 years of clearly documented estrangement, combined with the fact that we'd never received so much as a holiday card in return, made any future claim of family obligation legally meaningless, even if it would never have held up to begin with. "You have something most people in your position don't," Patricia told me, tapping the corner of a legal pad. "You have proof. Most people just have a feeling that something happened. You have dates." Patricia also helped us finalize something we'd been discussing for over a year, irrevocable trusts for both Matteo and Sophia, fully funded, fully protected, completely outside the reach of any future demand from anyone, present or future. I signed those documents on a Tuesday afternoon. The attorney asked if I had any questions. I had one. "If a family member shows up trying to claim access to any of this, what happens?" "Nothing," she said. "That's the entire point of doing it now instead of later." The acquisition closed 8 months after the trade publication piece. A larger logistics technology company out of Charlotte bought Fleetwise outright for $19 million. Eli and I held a combined 11% of the company after years of dilution through multiple funding rounds, which put our personal payout, after taxes and legal fees, somewhere around $1.4 million. It did not feel real. It felt like a spreadsheet cell with too many zeros that someone forgot to double-check. I checked the formula myself, twice. It was right both times. A regional business paper ran a feature, "Local Mechanics Startup Sold for $19 million, with a photo of Eli and me standing in front of the old shop on 5th Street where we'd met. It wasn't a huge story. It made the rounds locally, the way these things do. And apparently it made its way, one screenshot at a time, all the way back to a kitchen table in Briar Hollow, Kentucky. 3 days after that article ran, my phone showed 5 missed calls. 2 from a number I didn't recognize with a Briar Hollow area code, 1 from my father, 1 from my mother, 1 from Brianna. I didn't call back that night. I sat on our back porch with Eli, the kids long asleep, and looked at the screen for a long time before setting it face down and going to bed. It would ring again. I knew that the way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes color. My father's voicemail came the next morning while I was making coffee. His voice sounded older than I remembered, thinner, the same slow, careful cadence he'd always had, but with something cracked underneath it that hadn't been there before. "Naomi, baby girl, I saw the article. I just want you to know I'm proud of you. I've always been," a long pause, breathing like a man trying to find the rest of a sentence he wasn't sure he was allowed to finish. "Your mother wants to talk. She has some things she'd like to discuss. Please call her when you can. I love you." I played that voicemail 3 times. Baby girl. He hadn't called me that since I was maybe 14 years old. And I'm proud of you, 4 words I had silently waited 9 years to hear. But I rewound it again, listened to the structure of it, and noticed what wasn't there. He called after the acquisition article, not after the wedding, not after Sophia was born, not after a single one of the 7 birthday cards or the ultrasound photos I'd mailed over the years. He was proud of me on paper. He had always been proud of me on paper. What he had never once been was brave enough to pick up the phone when there was nothing attached to the call but love. My mother's text arrived 2 days after we returned from a quick trip to celebrate the deal closing. It was long, carefully composed, no typos, no casual abbreviations, the kind of message you write, delete and rewrite in your head before you ever type a word of it. Naomi, I know we've lost time. I think about you and the children every single day. Life is short, and I've come to understand that some things matter more than the differences that once divided us. I would like to talk about the children, about the future, about what it means to be a family again. There are things families should share with one another. I believe we can find our way back if you're willing. I read it twice and counted the words. 71, carefully chosen, and not one of them was sorry. Not one of them acknowledged that she had disowned her own daughter for marrying a man who already had a son, that she had returned 7 years of birthday cards unopened, or that she had referred to my children, in writing to a friend, as not having real grandparents. She called it the differences that divided us, as though our estrangement had been some abstract philosophical disagreement instead of a choice she made and enforced for 9 consecutive years. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it, printed it and added it to the binder. Item 29. First message from my mother in 9 years. 71 words, 0 apologies. Red pen, dated. I closed the binder, set it back in the drawer and looked at the framed photo beside my desk. Eli, Mateo, Sophia and me at the beach the summer before, all 4 of us squinting into the sun. That photo was my answer, sitting right there in the frame, long before I ever needed to say a word out loud. Aunt Denise called that Friday with the part I already suspected was coming. Brianna's telling everyone you live in some mansion now. She's saying Eli struck it rich overnight and your kids go to private school. None of it's true, but that's not really the point, Naomi. Your mom's planning a trip. Brianna told someone at the salon they're driving up next week. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. I know, I said. How could you possibly know that already? Because I read the group chat months ago, Denise. I've known this was coming since the day they found out the company sold. There was a long pause. So what are you going to do? I'm going to open the door, I told her. I'm going to let her talk. And then I'm going to show her exactly what's been sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk for 9 years. 2 months before my parents ever showed up in our driveway, Brianna texted me for the first time in 9 years. 6 words. Hey, thinking about you, how are the kids? As if those 6 words could undo 9 years of silence, as if this were simply a continuation of an ongoing conversation instead of a resurrection. I didn't reply for a week, mostly to see if she'd follow up, and she did, a second time. I'm actually going to be near you for a work thing next month. Would love to grab coffee. Eli said it was my call entirely. I agreed to meet her, but on my terms, a public cafe downtown, neutral, time limited, nowhere near the house. She showed up 15 minutes late in a blazer that looked expensive in the specific way clothes look expensive when someone's trying too hard to prove they're doing fine. She hugged me for longer than felt natural and told me I looked amazing 3 separate times within the first 10 minutes, and then she started asking questions. How big was the new house? Did the kids go to private school? Was Eli still running the company day to day, or had he stepped back since the acquisition? How many employees did Fleetwise have at the end? Had we bought anything else with the payout, a second property, a boat, anything like that? 31 questions. I counted the way I'd been counting things for years by then. Not one of them was how are you actually doing, or I'm sorry it's been this long, or even a simple how's Mateo. Halfway through her second latte, I caught her reflection in the cafe window angling her phone toward the parking lot, photographing my car. She was scouting. Building a report for someone, and I had a fairly good idea who. I let her finish her coffee. I answered everything vaguely and politely, the way you answer a stranger's small talk, and when we hugged goodbye she held on a beat too long again, like she was performing warmth for an audience that wasn't there. I drove straight home afterward and opened the binder. Item 28. Brianna reconnaissance visit. 31 questions documented, vehicle photographed, no apology offered, no mention of the last 9 years at all. Then I called Patricia a second time. They're coming, I told her. My mother, probably within a couple months of the acquisition news, she'll bring some kind of list. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You don't actually need me for the confrontation itself, she said finally. You need me for the trust structure, which is already done. What you're describing now isn't a legal problem, it's a personal one, and for that you already have everything you need sitting in a drawer. They arrived on a Tuesday at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen window, drying a coffee mug when their car pulled into the driveway after the 6-hour drive from Briar Hollow. My mother stepped out first, beige cardigan, the same pearl studs she'd worn to church my entire childhood, a folded piece of paper in her right hand. My father got out slower, hands in his pockets, looking up at our house, the way an appraiser looks at a property before naming a number. They stood on the front walk for a long moment before either of them moved toward the door. I watched my mother take in the porch, the garden Eli had planted that spring, the basketball hoop in the driveway, cataloguing it all the way you'd inventory an estate. The doorbell rang, I opened it. We stood 3 feet apart on either side of the threshold. She looked older, more grey threaded through her hair, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there 9 years ago. Her eyes, the same pale blue as mine, were already wet. Naomi. Mom. 4 seconds of silence I counted, the way I'd started counting things without realizing it years ago. We came to talk about the children's future, she finally said. Not I missed you, not I'm sorry. Not I love you and I was wrong. The children's future, children she had never met, whose photographs she'd opened, looked at and mailed back in resealed envelopes with tape over the flap. I looked past her shoulder at my father, who hadn't said a single word yet, then back at the folded paper in her hand. Come in, I said, and I led them to the kitchen, not the living room. The kitchen had good light. It had the refrigerator covered in Sophia's drawings and Mateo's spelling tests, and a photo of Rosa holding both kids at the beach. The kitchen was where truth lived in our house, and truth was exactly what we were about to have. She sat at the table. I poured 2 glasses of water. No coffee. Coffee is for people who are staying a while, and I hadn't decided yet whether that applied to them. My mother's eyes landed on the refrigerator, on Rosa's photo with the kids, and something crossed her face that I genuinely couldn't read, guilt maybe, or something closer to jealousy. Then she unfolded the paper. Blue ink, 5 bullet points, the unmistakable product of hours of private calculation. She read them aloud in a voice that had clearly been rehearsed in a car mirror, somewhere around hour 3 of the drive. Retirement supplement for your father and me, $250,000. I said nothing. Payoff on the family home mortgage, $140,000. I said nothing. Starting capital for your sister's bakery, $90,000. I said nothing. Your father's hip replacement and related medical costs, $52,000. I said nothing. A reunion fund, flights, a proper family gathering, something to bring everyone back together, $80,000. She folded the paper and set it gently on the table between us, the way you'd present a closing argument you were certain would win. This is what families do, Naomi. Your father worked his whole life. It's time the family gave a little back. I looked at that list. $612,000, itemized, calculated, presented like an invoice for services I had apparently always owed, and simply hadn't been billed for yet. Not once in the reading of it did she say my name with the word sorry attached to it. Not once did she acknowledge that she was sitting in a house she had never visited, asking for money on behalf of grandchildren she had never held. I picked up the list, read each line one more time, set it back down and stood up. I walked to my office, opened the bottom drawer exactly where I'd left it, and carried both binders back to the kitchen table. I set them down right next to her folded page, 2 documents side by side. Hers 1 page, 5 bullet points, $612,000. Mine 29 items, 9 years, 0 apologies received. What is that? My mother asked, staring at the navy binder with its visible red pen labels through the plastic cover. You brought a list, Mom, I said. I brought one too. She didn't understand yet. She would in a few minutes. I opened to tab 1, year 1 and started reading. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform anything. I read it the way I'd present a closing argument to a judge, factual, organized, item by item. The wedding photo, mailed and returned. The birthday cards, 7 years running, all sent back stamped in red. The voicemail transcript, 41 seconds, no callback. My father's 3-word text, give it time, 9 years ago, and how much more time exactly had he needed? Each item went onto the table beside the last one, white envelopes with red stamps, a steadily growing row of proof. My mother's composure started cracking somewhere around item 12, the screenshot of Brianna's text claiming my children didn't have real grandparents. That's not, Brianna didn't mean it like that, she started. I'm not finished, I said and kept going. Item 19, the monogrammed napkins for Brianna's wedding, returned unopened, tape on the box still sealed. Item 23, the birthday card that had been opened, the photo inside clearly looked at, then carefully resealed and mailed back anyway. Someone opened this one, Mom, I said, holding it up. Someone looked at their faces and then chose to send it back. Who opened it? Silence. Dad opened it, I said, watching her face. And you made him send it back? Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. I reached the final tab, the screenshots from the family group chat. I read Brianna's message aloud, slow and even. Make a list, be specific. She's an attorney, she responds to specifics. Then my mother's own words, the ones she clearly hadn't expected to ever see again. She has more money than this entire town put together. She can afford to help her own family. My mother's face changed entirely in that moment. The tears that had started a minute earlier simply dried up, replaced by something harder, something I recognized from childhood, not guilt, but anger at being caught. You had no right to read that, she snapped. I looked at her, level and steady. You had no right to return my children's photographs. The kitchen went completely silent. After everything your father and I did for you, she said, her voice climbing now, the wounded register I remembered from every disagreement of my childhood. The dance lessons, the car for your 16th birthday, putting you through your first 2 years of college before the scholarship kicked in, this is how you repay us. You raised me, I said. That's not a debt, Mom. That's what parents do. And I paid you back 9 years of birthday cards you never bothered to open until one of them might have had money attached to it. She had no response to that. I watched her search her usual arsenal, guilt, performance, the wounded sigh, and come up empty, because none of those tools work on a person holding the actual paper trail. My father finally spoke, quietly, from the other side of the table. Carol, maybe we should just... Don't, she cut him off, not even looking at him, and he didn't finish the sentence. That, more than almost anything else that afternoon, told me everything I needed to know about the shape of that marriage. Closed the binder, the rings clicked shut. You didn't drive 6 hours because you missed me, Mom, I said. You drove 6 hours because the numbers changed. She had nothing left to say to that, and I watched her search for something, some old guilt trip, some line that had always worked before, and come up with absolutely nothing that fit the moment. You said he wasn't good enough for this family, I continued. But for 9 years his mother was the only grandmother my children had ever known. The garage door rumbled open right then. Eli walked in through the laundry room, saw the binders on the table, saw my mother's face, saw mine, and didn't say a single word. He just set his keys down, walked over, sat beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. That was it. No confrontation, no speech, just a man sitting next to his wife because she needed him there. And my mother watching the exact thing she had once called unacceptable, steady, quiet, unshakable, sitting 3 feet away from her, completely unbothered by anything she might think of it. Mom, I said quietly, I'm not going to give you the money. She opened her mouth to argue, not because we can't afford it, because the moment I hand you a check, you'll convince yourself you were right to stay away until it became worth your while to come back. You'll tell yourself and you'll tell Brianna that the silence was just a rough patch, a misunderstanding that eventually worked itself out. It wasn't a rough patch. It was a choice you made every single year on purpose. I picked up her itemized list and held it out toward her. If you want to actually know your grandchildren, not as a line item in a financial plan, but as people, that starts with an apology. Not to me, to them, and it doesn't start today. It starts whenever you're ready to actually mean it. She didn't take the list. It hung in the air between us for a long moment before she finally reached out and folded it back into her purse, stood up and walked toward the front door without another word. At the threshold she stopped, turned halfway, opened her mouth, closed it again and left. The door clicked shut behind her, not a slam, just a quiet click, the sound of someone leaving who understood, somewhere underneath all that pride, exactly what she had lost and couldn't simply buy back. If someone in your life only showed up once the numbers changed, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, because I think it happens far more than anyone admits. And if this story reminded you that your worth was never about a dollar figure, share it with somebody who needs to hear that today. I want to tell you about one specific Christmas, because it explains better than anything else why none of what came later ever really tempted me. Sophia was 4, Matteo was 11, and Rosa had flown in 2 days early just to help wrap presents and supervise Eli's cooking, which mostly meant taking over the kitchen entirely by Christmas Eve. She had a tradition of telling the same story every year about the year she crossed the border with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph of her own mother. And how she'd promised herself that whatever family she eventually built would never make anyone in it feel like they had to earn their place at the table. She told that story again that year, with Sophia half asleep against her shoulder and Matteo pretending he wasn't listening while clearly listening to every word. I sat on the floor by the tree and thought about my mother's dining room 400 miles away, the one I'd seen secondhand in a photo with a caption that said my whole world, and I remember feeling, for the first time in years, something closer to pity than grief. They had a house full of people who shared their blood and almost none of the warmth sitting in my living room that night. The aftermath unfolded slowly, the way these things do once the dust actually settles. News travels through a town like Briar Hollow the way water moves through limestone slow, but eventually it reaches everywhere. Within 2 weeks, according to Denise, half the women's auxiliary at First Baptist knew some version of what had happened, though the details shifted a little with every retelling the way they always do in a small town. My mother stopped attending the Tuesday prayer group for a month. Pastor Green's wife asked her once, gently in the church parking lot, whether everything was all right with the older daughter, and Denise said my mother's smile in that moment looked like it had been stapled on. The town that had quietly let her cut me off for 9 years was suddenly very interested in asking why, and there was no version of the truth she could tell them that didn't make her look exactly like what she was. My father called 4 days later, not on a weekend but on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a contract at my kitchen table. "Your mother told me what happened," he said. "I waited. I should have opened that door for you 9 years ago. I should have picked up the phone the day Sophia was born instead of letting your mother make that decision for both of us. I should have done a lot of things differently and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Not because of the money, I don't want a cent of it. I'm sorry because I want to know my grandchildren and I want to know if you'll let me try." I was quiet for a long time, 17 seconds, I counted, old habit by then. "I believe you, Dad," I finally said, "but believing you and trusting you again are two different things. We start slow. Phone calls every couple weeks. No visits yet, no money discussed, just talking." "That's more than I deserve," he said. "It's exactly what you deserve," I told him. "Not more, not less." Brianna texted once, a single line, "You could have just helped us." I didn't reply. Some messages answer themselves better than anything I could have typed back. My mother never called, never texted, never wrote again. The silence returned, except this time it was entirely hers to carry, not mine. The binder went back in the bottom drawer. 29 items, 9 years. I didn't add a 30th. I genuinely hope I never have to. Here's what 9 years of silence taught me, and it's the only part of this story I actually want you to remember. Family isn't the people who happen to share your last name. It isn't the people who reappear once your net worth changes. Family is whoever shows up when your world is small, when your garage doubles as an office, when your Barbies need someone to rock them at 3 in the morning. It's the woman who flies in from another state every 6 weeks and never once misses a birthday in 9 years. It's the man who sits down beside you at your own kitchen table without needing to be told why you need him there. It was never about the money. It was always only about who actually showed up. I think about that itemized list sometimes, the one my mother folded so carefully on her drive up from Briar Hollow. $612,000 broken into 5 tidy bullet points, like grief and absence could be reduced to line items on an invoice. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful she wrote it the way she did, because it made something visible that had been true for 9 years anyway. To her, I had always been a resource to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved unconditionally. The binder in my drawer wasn't really revenge, and it never functioned like one. It was simply a record of who showed up and who didn't, kept by someone who had spent a career believing that if you don't write something down, eventually someone will insist it never happened at all. 9 years of returned cards taught me that love that has to wait for proof of profitability was never really love in the first place. It was an investment strategy wearing the costume of a family. Mateo is 15 now. A few weeks after my parents drove home from that visit, he asked me almost casually, while we were doing dishes, whether I thought my mother would ever actually apologize to him directly, the way my father had started to with me. I told him the truth that I didn't know, that some people get the chance to do the right thing and choose it anyway, the way his dad always had, and some people only ever move when there's a number attached to the decision, and I couldn't promise him which kind his grandmother would turn out to be. He thought about that for a second, dried the plate in his hand and said, "I don't think I need her to though. I've got Grammy Rosa." That's the whole story really, distilled into one sentence by a 15-year-old standing at my sink. Some people show up for free, for decades, without ever being asked twice. Everyone else can keep their itemized list. That's my story, 9 years, 29 items, 1 navy binder, and the family I built instead of the one I was born into. If this reminded you that your worth was never something other people get to put a price tag on, do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.